Morning all, author Brian S. Pratt here. Going to read chapter 16 of Fires of Prophecy, book 2 of the Morcyth Saga. So, 16, they're going to be leaving Khorasan. They've acquired Tirsa, Jerome's sister, so half of what they plan to do. Miko's still not available. He's somewhere heading south, still a slave. They're going to leave in search of him. They got guards, pit fighters. Scar and Potbelly has now appeared, as well as several others that everyone enjoys. And now they're going to leave town. Sorry getting an early start this morning. I have a hard time sleeping in. The next morning, when they headed out with the rising of the sun, everyone was quite ready to leave Khorasan and its slave market. With Jerome riding lead, the rest of their newly acquired guards spaced themselves along the caravan with Potbelly at the rear. Getting them into the saddle that morning had brought back the time when he first started riding back in Trindle. Smiling at the memory, James watched as Jerome and Shinnok attempted to show their new guards the proper way to mount a horse. After several attempts, which resembled an old Three Stooges episode, they managed to get everyone in the saddle. Now, I've had comments about that scene too. It's like, well, why don't they know how to ride a horse? It seems like, in that age, everyone should know how to ride a horse. But they were city people. They lived in the city of light. And if you live in a city and you don't really travel beyond the city, there's not really any reason to ever get on a horse or ever have a horse. Probably a lot of people in the city just didn't have a horse and never rode a horse because everything was within walking distance. So, should some of them have known how to ride a horse? Maybe. But I did what I did. Leaving the caravanserai, they pulled back onto the road. At the gates of Khorasan, they came to where the road split. They could either continue on through the gates and into Khorasan, or turn left to follow the road where it curved around the walls. Jerome turned left. On the far side of the city, they rejoined the main road as they followed the shoreline of the lake. Before they reached the southern shore, the road split yet again. One branch continued following alongside the lake, while the other took a more southeasterly direction. James hollered to Jerome to follow the road by the lake. He glanced back and nodded as he turned his horse onto it. Not too long after that, they reached the lake's southern shore and then followed the river flowing out of it to the south. If you remember, when James last saw Miko, he was in a wagon riding along the road that followed the river. That's why they followed the river. The road was quite busy with many people, both walking and riding, on their way to Khorasan. At one point, a long caravan passed by going north. James counted 25 wagons and almost 30 guards. By the end of the first day, they were sore and stiff. The complaining that was heard around the campfire that night, one would have thought they had just fought a hard and long campaign and suffered grievous wounds. "You poor little babies," Shinnok said mockingly as they sat and moaned about their sore posteriors and thighs. "Do you want me to rub your bum-bums for you?" "Shut up," said Scar said. "Yeah, or we'll beat your head in," added Potbelly as he gingerly sat down near the campfire. Shinnok just laughed. If you think you feel bad now, wait until tomorrow night. By then you should be really stiff and sore." They shot him ugly looks and said nothing. "It took a few days for us to get used to sitting on horses well," Jerome assured them. "It does get better once your muscles become accustomed to it." "I hope so," said Ken, the quarterstaffer. Delia saw James sitting a little ways off by himself and went over to him. "Are you okay?" "Just worried about Miko." "Did you check the mirror again?" she asked, when she saw it lying next to him. "Yes," he replied. "It still shows him traveling. I think they're making better time than we are." Not too surprising, since they don't have wagons slowing them down. It just seems like we are getting farther and farther behind," he said despondently. "Sometimes I feel like I'll never be able to catch up with him." Well, Miko has wagons. He's riding in a wagon. However, they're not loaded with goods. They're not loaded with water. They're not weighed down. They just got guys in them. "They've got to stop at some point," she assured him. Sighing, he said, I know. It just gets to me once in a while. Come over to the camp and join the rest of us, she suggested. It will take your mind off your worries for a time. Nodding, he got up and came to the campfire, where Scar and Potbelly were regaling everyone with their exploits at the fall of the City of Light. And then when the last one fell, Scar was saying, we ran, trying to find a way out of the city. Yeah, Potbelly joined in. By that time, there was only 4 of us left. We didn't get far before Hink and Olin bought it. A squad of soldiers had come upon us, and the fighting was fierce. Me and Potbelly stood back to back. Hink and Olin did the same. It was after the last of the soldiers fell that we saw them lying dead, Scar said. From the stack of bodies surrounding them, they took out over a dozen. Those are the pits, or hard fighters, Jerome said. Tanakh nodded. The best. Then what happened? Cassie asked from where she sat next to Tanakh, eyes wide at their account. They took us the only way you can take a pit fighter, Scar explained. We rounded a corner and came face to face with half a dozen crossbowmen, and that was that. Yeah, Potbelly added. They bound us, and before we knew it, we were taken out to one of those damn cursed slave lines outside the city. Oh, demon-cursed slave lines. Jerome held up his water bottle and said, not much to toast with, but here's to the pit fighters who didn't make it through their last battle. The others held up theirs, pausing in a silent toast, and then took a drink. Suddenly, Archie let out a cry, and Roland and Ezra made their good nights as they took Archie to the wagon where they bedded down for the night. Shortly after they left, the rest turned in, until the only one up was Stig, who had drawn first watch. He walked the perimeter around their camp. The sound of the crackling fire and his footsteps were the only sounds James heard as he tried to fall asleep. Worry about Michael's fate, as well as those traveling with him, weighed heavily upon him. Eventually, sleep won out. The next morning, Tanakh took great pleasure in watching his friends work out their stiffness and aches. You all look like a bunch of old ladies the way you're waddling around like that, he informed them, smiling at their misery. Leave him alone, Tanakh, Jerome scolded. All right, he said with a chuckle, I'll leave him alone. They managed to get back in the saddle, but not without groans of pain. You wouldn't think they had spent years in the pits to hear them carry on, so, Jerome whispered to James. This is different, he replied. Besides, it may not be just the pain, but an outlet for their fear and humiliation they endured while slaves. Jerome nodded. Perhaps. A couple of hours past midday, they came across a man on the side of the road standing by a wagon with a broken wheel. When Jerome came abreast of him, the man spoke. I can't understand you, Jerome said. Looking frustrated, the man spoke again to Jerome, this time speaking really slowly. He took extra time to pronounce his words carefully and clearly, as if that would enable Jerome to understand better. By this time, Roland rolled up in his wagon and began conversing with the man. With a look of relief, the man spoke rapidly, and when he paused, Roland said to those gathered around, He's asking if we can take him and his cargo a few miles down the road to a town called Enziala. They are having a celebration, and he has been contracted to supply wine. James looked at the man for a moment before Roland added, He's willing to pay 5 golds. Sure, James agreed. We have room. Turning to Stig and Scar, he said, Could you please help this gentleman transfer his barrels into the water wagon? There should be enough room. They dismounted and proceeded transferring barrels from his wagon to theirs. The man spoke again, and Roland explained that he was thanking them for their help. He then removed his horses from their traces and secured them to the rear of Roland's wagon. Then he climbed up and sat next to Roland as he waited for his cargo to be transferred. James heard Stig mumble, lazy merchant. Yeah, he could have at least helped, Scar said. When all the barrels were transferred, they got back into the saddle and their small caravan continued on down the road. Roland spoke with the merchant and then said to James, The celebration is a yearly festival where people come from far and wide to have fun. Kind of like the county fair. What's that? It's a festival where I come from that happens every year. Oh, he said. Maybe we could stop for the night, Dilly asked. When he turned to her, she said, It wouldn't take much time away from traveling, especially since we all need to stop for the night anyway. Also, I have a couple deliveries for there. You can go have fun, he told her. I don't think I'll be in much of a mood. 3 hours later, they came to Enziala, a large city sitting at a crossroads. To the north, along the river, was a large area with hundreds of tents. The crowd moved in and around the tents. That must To the north along the river was a large area with hundreds of tents. The crowd moved in and around the tent area. That must be the festival. I can't end two consecutive sentences with the exact same word. I just can't do it. East of town was an area where the caravans had gathered. Finding a good spot, they set up camp while Dahlia took the merchant and his wine to the festival. She brought Scar and Potbelly along for protection. After they had settled in, Tanakh, Cassie, Jerome, and Tersa, along with Rosa, Ezra, and Archie, decided to go and enjoy the festival. Do you want to come along? Cassie asked James. Shaking his head, he said, No, thank you. Someone needs to stay and look after things. Besides, I'm not really in the mood for fun. Miko? She asked. He just nodded. I'm sorry, she said, and then giggled as Tanakh took her by the hand and dragged her toward the festival. Over her shoulder, she said, Goodbye. Have fun, James hollered after them. The 4 guards remaining saw them heading for the festival and said, When do we get to go? Only 4 of you here at any one time to discourage thieves, he explained. When Scar and Potbelly get back with Delia, you can draw lots and then 2 at a time can go. All right, Yorn said. An hour later, they saw Delia trundling her way back with Scar and Potbelly riding along behind. Everything okay? Everything's fine, she assured him. Got the 5 golds and another 30 for the packages I delivered. Great. Looking around, she said, Where is everyone? James indicated the festival. They left shortly after you did. From the group of guards, he heard several curses and a cry for joy as they drew lots to see who got to go. Stick and Shorty walked over to James with happy expressions. So you get to go first? That's right, Shorty said. Could we perhaps have a few coins to spend? Stick asked. Sure, James said as he went over to the money box. He took out 4 silvers for each and handed them over. Can I come with you two? Delia asked when she learned they were headed to the festival. Sure, my lady, Stick said with a flourish, and then offered her his arm. His shield was slung across his back, and his mace hung at his hip. Taking his arm, she said to James, I'll be back later. Just send your escorts back in a couple of hours so the others can have their turn, he told her. Okay. Then she turned to her escorts. You heard that, right? Yes, ma'am, Shorty affirmed. They quickly made their way to the festival. She felt bad about leaving James back at the wagons, but understood how he felt. Minstrels roamed the grounds, providing music and atmosphere. There were tents and booths set up throughout where festival goers could purchase a multitude of various items. She paused in front of one that sold small wooden carvings of horses and admired the intricate workmanship that had gone into them. When the merchant asked if she wished to purchase one, he was disappointed when she shook her head and moved on. That's me at these festivals. I look at everything, and everyone's always expecting me to buy stuff. I rarely do. I mean, my house is full of stuff. When I buy stuff now, it's like, okay, where am I going to put it? What do I displace to put this new thing, right? And there's not always a place. They made their way deeper into the sea of tents and came across Roland and his family. Archie held one of the wooden horses from the display Delia had examined earlier, happily sucking on his head. Where's Tanakh and Cassie? Don't know, he replied. They went off with Jerome and Tersa shortly after we arrived. If you should run into them, tell them I'm here. Be happy to, he replied. James didn't come? Shaking her head, she said, he didn't feel like it. He's still worried about his friend Miko. Roland nodded in understanding. Want to stay with us? Thank you, but I want to find Tanakh and Cassie, she said as she glanced around at the crowd of people. Somehow. Good luck, he said as they moved on. Stopping at another booth selling colored bottles. Delia and her escorts wound their way through the people, occasionally stopping at booths to browse the items on display. They came to an open area where a man was trying to entice passers-by to test their skill. He had a target set up over 100 feet away, and in front of him were several throwing knives. To win, you needed to hit the bullseye in the center of the target. Intrigued, Shorty came up and took one of the knives, testing it for balance. The man started speaking, but was stopped when Shorty held up his hand. Do you understand the common tongue? Yes, sir, the man replied. For just 2 coppers, you may try your skill, and if you hit the bullseye, you get one of these, he indicating a selection of jewelry and bracelets. and bracers. "All right," he said as he handed over one of the silvers James had given him. The man took it and gave him his change. By this time, a few onlookers had stopped to see how he would fare. He selected the first knife he examined, and then stood with feet a foot apart, so he was well balanced. Taking careful aim, he took a couple deep breaths and then threw. The knife sailed through the air and, to the amazement of the crowd, struck the target dead center. The onlookers cheered. The man said, "We have a winner! See how easy it is?" To Shorty he said, "Please take your choice." Selecting a necklace, he turned and offered it to Delia. "I would be honored if you would accept this from me." When she hesitated, he said, "You needn't feel it a commitment. I would just like you to have it." When she still hadn't taken the necklace, he added, "I certainly can't wear it." She laughed. Taking the necklace, she put it around her neck. "Thank you, Shorty." He smiled and blushed slightly. As they moved on, another person tried their luck, but the knife flew wide, missing their target. Only one of the knives was balanced properly, he explained. "If you were to use the others, you'd be in danger of hitting yourself," he continued, laughing. They moved along and eventually found the others sitting at a table enjoying a meal as they listened to a group of musicians. There was an open area in front of where the musicians played where couples could dance. Several couples were already out there. As Delia approached, she caught Tanak's eye. "Why aren't you out there dancing?" Blushing slightly, he said, "I don't know any of the dances." Taking a seat next to Cassie, she asked, "Need any help getting him out there?" "Yes, I do," she said, acting as if she was put out. A poorly hidden smile said that she really wasn't. The musicians finished their song to a smattering of applause and then began another, this time a fast-paced one. "Okay," Delia said to Tanak, "now's your chance. Get moving." There was a trace of fear in his expression when he glanced to the dance floor. Cassie got up and practically had to drag him to the dancing area. "I never thought she would get him out there," Jerome said as he watched Tanak doing his best. "For someone who's graceful in battle, he's sure clumsy out there," Tersa added. When Tanak looked over to them with an expression bordering on fear, they gave him signs of encouragement. After a few minutes, he began to get the hang of it and started flowing with the music. "Your turn, dear brother," Tersa said as she dragged him out there despite his protests. Delia sat and watched as Jerome and Tanak both fumbled and misstepped as they danced. Shaking her head and silently amused, she sat back and enjoyed herself. Long after the sun had gone down, James saw them returning. "Have a good time?" Cassie rushed to him and in her excitement said, "Tanak and I are to be married." "What?" he exclaimed. Tanak looked both happy and scared out of his mind. "He proposed to me while we were dancing," she told him. "Congratulations," he said to them both, shaking Tanak's hand. "When will you be married?" "We want to wait until we are back home or maybe in Cardry," Tanak said with his arm around her waist. "That's right," added Cassie. We didn't want to be married in the Empire." "I'm happy for both of you." Cassie gave Tanak a big hug as they settled down around the fire and then leaned her head on his shoulder. Tanak just sat there with a happy and contented look on his face as he held her tight. Putting their heads together, they talked softly. James awakened the next morning to find Tanak and Cassie sleeping together, wrapped in each other's arms. He put the horses in their traces as everyone stirred. Shortly, they were on the road again. He pushed them hard the entire day, anxious to reach Miko before something happened to him, only allowing a few short breaks before pressing on. The miles quickly passed, and by nightfall had made it to a town called Yahara. A small town, barely more than a village really, but it had a well-ordered inn serving good food. James offered to spring for a room for the two lovebirds, but Cassie turned him down, saying it wouldn't be right for them to have one when no one else did, much to the disappointment of her betrothed. So they spent another night wrapped up together in a blanket on the ground. Everyone can see that the two of them were deeply in love and belonged together. Well, also in that society, I would think for a woman, sex before marriage was probably seriously frowned upon too. That was probably more important back then than it was now in the terms of reputation and so forth. So Cassie probably wanted to wait until they were married before that moment came. The following morning, they got an early start. Before the sun had risen much above the horizon, they were already a mile down the road. A little before noon, they entered rolling hills, which stretched a long way ahead of them. The road continued following the river as it wound its way through the hills. Ever since Yahara, the other traffic on the road had dropped off to almost nothing. Only the occasional rider or caravan was encountered. At sunset, when they set up camp, they found an area adjacent to the river where they could have ready access to water. James even waded out into the river and did his fisherman routine, backing several large reddish-orange fish. "Neat trick," Roland said when James brought back his third fish. "It comes in handy." Everyone enjoyed the fish, and after dinner, they took turns telling stories or singing songs. Most of them were love songs or stories about those in love. Stig began recalling his first amorous encounter, but when he got to some rather personal details, Cassie blushed a deep red. Tanuk shot him an annoyed look, and he cut it short. Then someone else broke in and began another song, this one a fast-paced, silly song for Archie. "Better get to sleep," James announced when the song was over. "I'd like to start early tomorrow." Some grumbled about having to turn in, but most took it in stride. The only ones who didn't seem to mind were Cassie and Tanuk, who readily laid down together. Cassie laid her head on his chest and quickly fell asleep. Okay, guys, you know what I'm talking about, right? Is there anything better than the feeling of your gal's head on falling asleep on with their head on your chest? Oh, okay, a baby, your firstborn on doing that, naked and little bitty baby on your chest. Okay, that is better than your gal, but not by much. Later that night, while James was taking his turn at watch, he glanced over and saw Tanuk's head was up and he was looking anxiously around. James walked through the sleeping forms and came over to the knife room. "What's the matter?" Tanuk gestured to Cassie sleeping on his chest. "I gotta pee." James tried to hide his amusement, but failed as he just shrugged his shoulders at Tanuk's predicament. Guys, we've all been there, right? Your arm falls asleep, you gotta pee, whatever. Your favorite show ends and some infomercial or a talk show comes on. Yeah. He started to get up and Cassie stirred. "I'll be right back," he assured her. She laid her head down on her arms and said, "Hurry back." In no time at all, he was back, and she again laid her head down on his chest. James smiled at the pair, then woke Jerome for his turn at watch. Lying down, he soon drifted off to sleep. Ah! A cry in the night startled James awake, just in time to see Ken fall into the fire with an arrow piercing his chest. Without thought, he caused a great burst of light to explode over the camp, and in that brief instant saw a dozen or more attackers approaching from all directions. Everyone came awake when the light burst overhead. "We're under attack," he yelled as he got up, trying to find the bowman. Everyone exploded into action. The girls hid under a wagon while the guys grabbed their weapons and moved to engage the enemy. With light to see by, the surprise the attackers had held in the dark was gone. The pit fighters rushed to engage the attackers, wreaking havoc with skills honed by years in the pits. James located two bowmen who each got an arrow off before James had a chance to take them out. Another attacker rushed him was almost upon him when a knife flew from the camp, embedding itself through the man's left eye. He turned and saw Shorty standing atop a wagon as he let fly another knife at an approaching attacker. Scar and Potbelly stood back to back as they fended off three swordsmen while Jerome and Tanuk were busy slicing and dicing ones of their own. He looked to find Stig engaged with a large attacker wielding a long sword. Stig deflected the thrust of the man's sword and his shield and then followed through with his mace, pulping the man's face. Seeing Scar and Potbelly engaged with three, he raced over to render aid. Scar, with both swords weaving a pattern of death, took out one of those pressing him in Potbelly. Turning to engage the other, he watched as a hole opened in the man's chest, blood and gore spraying out his back. He looked behind him and saw James readying another slug as he prepared to take out another attacker. Between Potbelly and himself, they quickly dealt with the last of the attackers near them before Stig had a chance to join them. Scar quickly looked around for another to engage, but all he saw were dead bandits lying everywhere. Shorty jumped off the wagon and raced to where Ken smoldered in the fire and pulled him out. The smell of burnt flesh and hair permeated the entire area. "Tanuk!" he heard Jillia's angry cry. He looked over and saw her cradling Cassie's head in her lap. Blood from where an arrow protruded from her stomach rapidly spread across her face. "Cassie!" Tanuk's cry echoed across the battlefield as he raced to her. He dropped to his knees, tears falling as he looked at Sudelia. She blinked away tears of her own, and shook her head. "Tanakh," Cassie said weakly when she saw him. "Yes, my dearest," he said, trying to hold back the sobs. "I can't wait to be your wife," she said distantly. "You will soon," he said, as he took her into his arms, brushing strands of her golden hair out of his face. "Don't leave me," he cried as he started to sob. "Silly boy," she said as she looked into his eyes. She raised her hand and laid it gently against the side of his face. "I'll never leave you. I love you. I love you too." A tear fell from his face into hers. "Maybe tomorrow," she said as her voice began to grow faint, "we can dance again." And then she smiled as he kissed her on the forehead. She closed her eyes as her body relaxed in death. "Cassie!" Tina cried as he gently took her as if she were just sleeping. "Oh, my sweet, sweet darling Cassie." He then held her tightly to his chest as sobs racked his body. He just sat there holding her as he rocked back and forth. His head snapped up as he looked to James with red, tear-filled eyes. "You can save her, can't you?" Shaking his head as his own tears fell, he said sadly, "Some things I am unable to do, but..." And then he started sobbing all over again. Everyone left Tanakh alone in his time of grief. Each in their own way cared for Cassie, and their passing attested him very deeply. While Tanakh mourned the loss of his beloved, the others went through the grisly process of removing the dead. James and Jerome went through the dead bodies and collected what valuables they had. "I think they were just bandits out looking to rob us," Jerome said. "It looks that way," agreed James. Then he gestured to Tanakh. "Think he'll be okay?" "I don't know," Jerome said. "I've never seen him like this." By this time, Yorn and the others had wrapped Kens in a blanket. As they picked him up, he said to Jerome, "We're going to bury him out in the desert." Nodding, he replied, "Just a second, and I'll come with you." He was about to go over to Tanakh when Tanakh all of a sudden stood up, holding Cassie in his arms. Without a word, he carried her out into the desert. When he saw Jerome coming toward him, he just shook his head, and then was soon lost in the dark as he took his beloved out into the desert to bury her. "All right," he said to Yorn as he joined them. "Let's go." James watched as they carried Ken out to be buried, taking a different direction than Tanakh, so as not to intrude upon his time with his beloved. James and the rest remained in the camp and waited for the others to return. No one felt like talking. Each was lost in their own reflections. In a little bit, Jerome and the others returned from burying Ken. He looked around and asked, "Tanakh hasn't returned yet?" "No," they replied. He turned and looked out toward where his friend had disappeared into the night with Cassie. An hour later, Tanakh returned to the camp. Eyes red and swollen and covered in dirt from digging her grave, he looked a pitiful sight. The necklace he had recently given her hung around his neck. His knives were caked with dirt, obviously what he had used to dig her grave. That, above everything else, gave Jerome cause to worry for his friend. Nothing had ever before meant more to him than his knives, and for him to not have cleaned them could not bode well. Tanakh sat near the fire and stared vacantly into the flames. They tried to engage him in conversation, telling him of their sorrow for his loss, but he didn't respond. Eventually, he just went to his bedroom and collapsed. The others stayed up for a little longer, discussing their worries for Tanakh and the loss of their friends. But soon they all grew tired and one by one returned to their bedrolls and drifted off to sleep. In the morning, Tanakh was gone. And that's chapter 16. That's one of my sadder chapters. Cassie died. That's really sad. And I've gotten a lot of questions. Why did Cassie have to die? Well, when I wrote it, there was no specific reason. It just flowed that way. And when I wrote it, it just felt right to write it. And Tanakh leaving, I didn't actually anticipate that until I wrote in the morning Tanakh was gone. In that moment, then I knew Tanakh was gone. And how was I gonna know? And in that moment, I had no plans of what was going to happen. No plans of Tanakh's future, anything. But man, a lot happened because of this scene. So, yeah, it's sad. And a lot of people have complained that Cassie died, but people do die. Ken, the staffer, he didn't really have much of a play in here, and I guess as it turns out he was more of a red shirt, if you know what that means. And yeah, it's sad. Tanakh, he goes a little insane here. But chapter 17 is coming up. We're halfway through the book, and a couple weeks and we'll be done with it. Then on to book 3, Warrior Priest of Damon Lee. Yeah. Cassie. I've had a lot of grief over Cassie. First, her sneeze. But but for those who have been following this, I think I kind of explained that one. And now it's her death. Well, her death, death often prompts people to do things they would not normally do, and get people to go in directions that they would not normally go. And if you believe in the gods or a god or whatever, then sometimes things need to happen, and sometimes people have to die in order for those things to happen, which is sad. It's not fair, but that's just the way it is. Yeah, it's sad when you lose somebody. Well, I'm going to do chapter 7. Oh, today, okay, personal stuff. Today is Tuesday the 2nd. We're going to do our 4th of July celebration today because my boy has to work on the 4th. And he's got to work tomorrow too. So we're going to have our dinner today. We're not going to do fireworks. We don't really do fireworks here. There's just the 3 of us. And since I'm the one who has to do it all, fireworks have never really been that exciting for me. Like, I would take the kids to the big fireworks in Linwood, Washington that the city put on at the park, and we sit there, have a picnic. It was a nice day. Then when the fireworks started, after 5 minutes, I'm ready to go because I can only watch so many explosions before they stop before I can no longer ooh and ah at them. And it's just like, and then it becomes tedious, and then I just want to go home, and I get impatient. So, some people really love them, but for me, I get bored easily, I guess. So, I finally got a new subscriber here on YouTube. Yeah, I'm up to 169. Yeah, this ain't gonna amount to squat. TikTok's not gonna amount to much either, as far as that goes. I'm still gonna do it, but I'm not gonna focus on it like I had the last couple months. But so with this upload, I will now have an equal number of videos to subscribers. And if I don't get one today, tomorrow I will have more videos than subscribers. Is that a good thing? Probably not. But like I've said before, I'm just not that exciting. I'm just an old guy that talks. I need to get a kid to sit on my shoulder, and maybe people will watch me more. I'll do 17 tomorrow. Until then, you have a good day. It's going to be 100 degrees today. Ooh, that's going to be nice, isn't it? Talk to you later.